Hey folks, this is Grim Perspectives. I'm Grim. Today I'd like to talk to you about building a tough character. Because I kind of skipped over it over the last few videos. We talked about randomness in Savage Worlds and how you handle it as a game master. And in that video I said, well, don't worry too much about your player characters. They can take wounds, they can soak. It's more or less their problem. They will manage somehow. Well, this video is about how to manage somehow. And in the video after that, we talked about a dramatic perspective from a storytelling point of view on character death. And so we kind of skirted around this topic for a whole bit, and I haven't really given advice to players yet on how to build a character that is tough enough for the Savage Worlds. Because combat in Savage Worlds is really scary and it can be really dangerous because it can be random. And I like it that way, because I think combat should never be trivial. It's a life and death thing. And that means it needs to be dangerous and it needs to be scary. And that brings us to face the problem that your character could die at any moment in combat. And that means you need to really keep in mind what your character is willing to die for. And that more or less hooks in where we left off in the last video when we talked about character death and what the difference between a heroic character death, a dramatic character death, or tragic character death, and a just random character death is. And what we're gonna do today is really hooks in that last part, where you want to avoid random character death and you generally want to make your character tougher so he can survive that heroic trial he's facing. And maybe not die a tragic death, but because even if he has flaws and he might be overeager or he might be a pretty heroic guy, he might be loyal to his comrades, all things that can get him into trouble. He might not necessarily always make the smart choice, especially if that involves turning tail and fleeing, something like that. But especially if you want to play on those character flaws, it might be beneficial to have a character that is tough enough, that can take it, and that isn't going to die on his first session. So, how do we do that? Well, let's take a look. First, we need to have a quick look at how do you die. Because it's Savage Worlds specific, it's game mechanics, so how do you actually die? Well, it's easy. It's just 5 simple steps, more or less. You get into a fight, you get hit, you take wounds, you fail your last Vigor check, and then you bleed out. And then you're done. So, the question is how to avoid all those things here. So, you get into a fight. In pen paper, that happens quite a lot. But if you think about it from an everyday person's point of view, a fight is really a scary thing. If someone's drawing a weapon on you, or you draw a weapon on someone else, it usually means that you are either gonna get severely hurt or even die. Because even if you are better than the other guy who you draw a sword on or something, there is always a really good possibility that you will get hurt in that fight. So if you might get hurt or even die in the fight, it's good to keep in mind if your character is really willing to die for that shit. If someone spilled your beer at the bar, your usual response would be to, well, say, that was stupid, why did you spill my beer? Or something. It would probably not be an adequate response to draw a sword and try to kill him, because he then will do everything in his power to kill you. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be killed over spilled beer. So, what is your character willing to die for? We covered that in the last video for a bit, where we talked about tragic and random death. And it's really important here that you keep in mind is your character really willing to die for this shit? But sometimes you have to get into a fight. Maybe it's something really important to your character and you are really willing to risk injury or death to settle something. And, well, what usually happens first before shit gets really bad for you is you get hit. How do you get hit? Well, the opponent in melee has to hit your parry. Your parry is you have your fighting die +2. And that means a high fighting die makes you less likely to get hit, which is quite a nice thing. There is a problem though, because I talked about viewing stuff from an everyday person's point of view. And sometimes my player come to me and they have a character concept and they decide not to pick fighting as one of their skills. And while it's for them a valid choice for their character, and I'm not going to forbid someone from not picking fighting, that means that your parry will be 2, because your fighting die doesn't exist. You just have the +2. A parry of 2 is terribly easy to hit. You really have a tough time if that character should get into trouble. So, I usually ask those players a few questions to make sure that they not rather take a dice 4 in fighting. And those questions are: did your character have siblings you tussled with, or really anyone else that you played rough with, essentially? Because if you played rough, then you probably know what it feels like to get a slap or two, or maybe fall, hurt yourself. You're not gonna lose your shit over seeing your own blood, maybe, if you've played a lot outside and had siblings that, I've got 2 brothers, so I know that when you have siblings, it's sometimes they don't have your best interest at heart. So, did you have siblings or someone else in your youth that you played rough with? Does your character feel reasonably comfortable moving on his own feet? Well, if you are not physically inept, so if you aren't a couch potato or disabled in some way, then your character probably feels pretty comfortable moving on his own feet, which is like the main thing about legwork, so getting out of reach from someone. And if your character is feeling physically comfortable with himself, then he might have a fighting die of at least a die 4, not representing any kind of combat training, but just his ability to get out of the way when needed. And along a similar vein is, does your character have adequate reflexes, like straying away from dangerous things? Most people have those reflexes. That's why they are called reflexes. And if someone throws a ball at your head, you are going to duck if you see it coming. And essentially those things are what might be reasonable justification for your character to have at least a dice 4 in fighting. So before you build a character that doesn't have fighting at all, keep that in mind. There's really a lot of justification for just taking a dice 4 in fighting, and if you're playing in a setting that might involve combat, it's not that bad to, at least take the skill. So, melee combat, you get hit and the opponent needs to hit your parry to hit you. Range combat does not have the parry stat. In range combat, the opponent just wants to hit a 4 and then he's hit you. Yeah, but you can do something to make your character more survivable then. Because if you look at footage from war zones or well done action films involving soldiers, or even series or something involving law enforcement officers, people tend to go into cover if they are shot at and if they keep their head. So you get shot at, you're not losing your shit, go for cover. Because in Savage Worlds, it's really easy to make that work mechanics-wise, because if you're in light covers, like quarter or less of your body is covered, you get -1 to being hit by ranged attacks. If you're in medium covered, so about half your body is covered from view from the attacking character, then you're at a -2 to being hit. And if you're in heavy cover, so more than 75% of your cover of your body is behind cover, then you're at a -4 to being hit. That's really important. We're not talking Dungeons and Dragons where -4 is something, yeah, I can make it work. No, it's Savage Worlds where you roll a dice 4 or a dice 6 or a dice 8 to hit someone. And you want to hit a 4 and you get a -4 penalty, that means even the guy with dice 8 in shooting needs to roll the maximum amount on his dice. He can hit you because even a guy with a dice 4 in shooting might hit you because those dice can ace, but a -4 penalty is really big. If there's no cover around, shooters are sometimes designed with adequate bits of chest-high walls everywhere and you can get into cover. But if there isn't adequate cover around, remember that dropping prone is the same as medium cover in Savage Worlds. So, get into cover. If you can't get into cover or you need to take the attacker out, you might want to move into melee distance, because in close combat a ranged attacker can only use weapons that are pistol-sized or smaller, and the enemy needs to hit your parry, which means that especially if you're competent in melee combat, he might need to hit a higher number than just the 4 he would otherwise have to hit. And that's a really cool mechanic, I think, because if you're training self-defense, which I've done for quite a bit, and you are faced with a gun, of course, the first thing is try not to give the other one a reason to shoot. But if you think you are forced to try to disarm him, the main thing is always get past the point of the gun without being shot. If you get close enough for that, then you have a chance to get out of it unhurt. Not something you might want to do, not something I'm likely to be willing to die for. But, well, if you have no other choice, getting close is what you want to do against ranged combat, and Savage Worlds mirrors that nicely in its rules. So, you've gotten into a fight and you've gotten hit. What happens next? You take damage, and your damage is compared to your toughness. Your toughness is half your Vigor die +2, and if it's higher than that, you are shaken. If it's a lot higher of that, for every 4 points of damage above your toughness, you take 1 wound. Taking wounds is bad, like really bad. For every wound, you take a -1 penalty to all your rolls. And I just told you that a -2 penalty for medium cover is like a big deal. It means you get hit a lot less. If you are wounded and take a -2 penalty to nearly all your rolls, then it will make you significantly more inept to face any danger. It will really, really hinder your ability to damage your opponent, hit your opponent. Even mundane tasks might be real difficult if you have a wound penalty. So, wounds are something you might want to avoid. How can you avoid wounds? Well, you can avoid them preemptively, because it's not just your vigor that influences your toughness, you also get armor. And armor is really a big deal. It's kind of a thing in history then that if you went out into combat, you got at as much protective gear as you could afford and as you could carry, because it would make it more likely for you to survive whatever you were about to face. So the same thing is true here. Armor has a weight, which might require sufficient strength to equip it and wield it, essentially, and it has a cost. And it's same as in an historical context. If you're knowing you're gonna face danger, then you will want to protect yourself, and that means getting equipment that you can carry that doesn't hinder you too much, but it will protect you. As much of that equipment as you can carry and as you can afford. So, getting armor and by extension shields, if you are playing in a setting where shields would make sense. So, take armor, take shields. That's a preemptive way of reducing the amount of wounds you might be taken. If you are in the combat and you've taken the damage, then it's too late for that. If you had no armor, then yeah, well, tough luck. If you had armor and you've taken too much damage, that's what can happen in Savage Worlds. So, what you can do then is soak wounds. Because for a Benny, you spend a Benny, and then you can roll Vigor and reduce the number of wounds you suffered by 1 for each success and for each race. So if you've taken 2 wounds, a raise, so rolling an 8 or higher on the Vigor check, will allow you to reduce the number of wounds you took by 2, which means you haven't taken a wound. You were just tough enough to soak that damage. Which is a cool mechanic, especially because it ties into that Benny and role-playing mechanic. First thing is, manage your Bennies, don't spend them on shit that might just make you look bad. I know players that, I rolled a bad fighting roll, or I know rolled a bad whatever, and I'm gonna spend a Benny on it, but because I do not want my character to fail. Your character is failable. So it doesn't really make sense to try to avoid every failure by spending Bennies. And if you're playing in a setting that involves combat, you might need your Bennies for later on when you get damaged. So, what do you want to do? You want to manage your Bennies, spend them only when you need to. You want to get them back if you've spent them, and that means you need to play on your hindrances. If your character is loyal, play on that hindrance. If there's a friend in danger, you might brave danger, just face it, because he is in danger, you will likely be too if you try to rescue him, but you are playing on your hindrance. Choose the right hindrance, and character creation is something that fit your character, and if you're in play on that hindrance. If your game master, as I tend to be at times, is distracted and doesn't realize it, you can be a bit on the nose, like, I think that was a pretty loyal thing I did there, hint hint. And well, your game master normally knows that he has his hands full and will not hopefully take it amiss if you drop hints every now and then, if you think you're really getting your character into danger by playing on a hindrance. And the third thing is, for soaking wounds, you might consider the Elan Edge, which essentially gives you a +2 bonus to everything you spend a Benny on, and that involves soaking rolls. So if you need to spend a Benny to soak wounds, that gives us a +2 bonus, which is essentially half a wound every time we soak. That's cool. So if you have an edge to spend, that really helps you out. So, you have taken wounds. Every wound we already talked about means a wound penalty to nearly every roll. Soaking rolls as well, for instance. If you've taken too many wounds, if you take your 4th wound, then you might be called upon to make your last Vigor check. So, your last Vigor save. Keep in mind, we've taken wounds now. We've taken 3 wounds, and the 4th wound we would take actually forces us to make the last Vigor roll, which means that we have a -3 penalty for the wounds alone at this point. So we roll Vigor, including those -3 wound penalties. And if we roll a 1 or less, which is quite possible since we've got the penalty, then our character is just dead. Plain dead as a doornail. If we fail the roll, then we need to roll on the injury table, and that sucker is nasty. And this injury that we take is permanent. We can't get rid of it by normal means. It's really hard to get rid of a permanent injury. So, and the victim is bleeding out. So you are bleeding out on top of that if you fail the roll, which again, with the penalties, is very easy to do. You essentially need to roll a 7 or higher, modified by the -3, to get a success. And a success is you still roll on the injury table and you take an injury. But at least the injury will go away when your wounds are healed and you aren't bleeding out. And if you score a raise, then you still need to roll on the injury table, but the injury will go away after 24 hours or when all your wounds are healed. Keep in mind that if you aren't bleeding out, so if you got a success or a raise, you might be still part of the combat. You might be still able to move and act. You just have taken, maybe you had a roll on the injury table, you have a permanent injury, you still have the wound modifiers, but you still might be able to save your skin and get out of there. But if you failed it and you are bleeding out, that's really bad for you. What can you do? Well, let's first take a look at the injury table. The injury table says roll 2d6. And if you roll a 2, you get hit, in the unmentionables. And yeah, you can't reproduce anymore. Tough luck, that must have hurt. If you roll a 3 or 4, you get hit in the arm. You have now only one functional arm. The arm isn't necessarily severed or something, but it's no longer functional. And there's a lot of shit you can't do if you have only one working arm. If you get hit in the guts, it might be one of 3 results. Essentially, one of 3 attributes will drop by 1 die category. That hurts as well. If you get hit in the leg, then you are lame now, which means you move slower. And if you get hit in the head, then, again, one of 3 possibilities, but the choices are you are ugly now because you got a hideous scar, you are blind on one eye now, or you suffer brain damage and your smarts drop. None of those results is one you would like. Especially not permanently. So, you had to roll on the tables. You had your chance to make your last Vigor save and you missed it. Now you're bleeding out. Forgot something as well. Hard to kill. There are 2 ways to make this last Vigor save easier. One is hard to kill, which means that you can ignore the wound penalties for this last save here. Which makes it a whole lot easier to handle, because ignoring -3 penalties, normal success, which means that none of the effects you take from being knocked out is permanent, which is very important. A success is not that hard to do, especially if you're a wild card and have that wild die. But with the penalties is pretty much near impossible. And ignoring those wound penalties is great, which helps you. Hard to kill helps you a lot there. What also helps you is Nerves of Steel. Nerves of Steel allows you to ignore 1 point of wound penalties. It's not as good for this role, but it helps you anywhere in the fight. So you might take a wound and still continue to be effective in combat, which is quite nice. It's just more broadly applicable than Hard to Kill. It's also less powerful in the specific circumstances here, if you are threatened with utter death and permanent injury. So, but after that, if you failed your last Vigor check, you bleed out. Bleeding out means you have to make a Vigor roll at the start of each round in which you have been dealt an action card. So in each round now, you roll a Vigor roll, and this again includes the -3 penalty, though it's hard to do. And if you fail, you die. Which means it's very, very possible that when you get a bleeding out result, you are dead in the next round. That's really, really bad. If you score a success, which is tough to do, then you still need to roll again next round. If you roll a raise, then you stabilize. But good luck rolling a raise with a -3 penalty. That's really hard to do. So bleeding out essentially means you're gonna be gone in a few rounds. Yeah. And then, well, you died. There might be something. You might have harder to kill. Harder to kill is an edge. You can only take it at veteran and you need hard to kill. But, well, essentially it means every time you would die, it has gone so far, you get the toss of a coin. So you roll a die and on an odd result, you're dead. On an even result, you are somehow alive. And even if it is a Rasputin-like situation, you are still alive. So that might save you, but if you haven't got harder to kill, you are dead. You died. So, what do we take from this video? There is a part of the fight where things aren't that bad yet. You got into a fight, you got hit. You can still handle that. But if you take wounds and you have those wound penalties, shit gets serious very soon. You are less effective in combat, you might get damaged more easily because you can't soak as well. You might run out of bennies because you are forced to try to soak all over again or re-roll important rolls. And then if you can't soak anymore or take a forced wound for any reason, then you are forced to roll your last Vigor check and you bleed out. And we've just noticed how serious that can be. So, what to do? Well, if you take wounds, you might take the opportunity and try to retreat. Because if you've taken wounds, you are no longer that effective in combat. And yeah, getting out there while you still can might be the smart move. It's again a question if for your character, are you willing to die for this? And if you aren't, then get the fuck out. After that, well, apart from that, make smart decisions. Avoid unnecessary danger. Stay in cover and retreat while you can. Those are decisions. It doesn't matter what character you are, what build you have. Just keep that in mind. Unnecessary danger. Stay out of it. Stay in cover if you get shot and retreat while you can. Then there are other stuff. We want to avoid building Mayfly characters. So characters that go in and after one session they are dead because they are essentially not able to survive in a setting that might involve combat. And how do we avoid building Mayfly characters? Well, we do not dump fighting. We do not dump vigor. And apart from that, well, that's pretty much all there is to not building a Mayfly. You might want to toughen up your character a bit, because just you have a dice 4 in fighting and you have more than a dice 4 in vigor. That doesn't necessarily make you die hard. It just means that you aren't the first one to die in the horror film, hopefully. You might want to toughen up your character further, and you can do that by increasing your fighting skill. You might do that by increasing your vigor, and you might do that by wearing armor and or shield, especially if you know that combat is coming up. Apart from that, you might take a few edges into consideration. Elon, nerves of steel, and hard to kill. And I ordered them in that way because Elon is widely applicable. It helps you every time you roll a Benny. It's really cool, widely applicable. It's not just not to die, it helps you in every situation, and especially if you want to prevent dying. So it's really really useful in lots of situations. Nerves of Steel is only applicable when you have a wound, so it's not that general as Elon, but on the other hand, it's more widely applicable than Hard to Kill, because Hard to Kill is only helping you on that last step when you should have gotten the fuck out. Okay, so those edges, I would consider them in that order. And apart from that, just don't play dumb, right? That's it for today. It's been a long video. I hope you made it to this point. If you liked the video, hit like. If you want to stay up to date on what we are gonna do next, then hit subscribe. And if you know someone who might be interested in the stuff we do, then send them a link and give them the chance to participate. If you have something you would like to tell me, like this video was too long, or this and that happened to me, or I know someone who could pretty much learn from that here, or whatever, comment. I would like to get a discussion going. And yeah, I would really like to see our small community grow for a bit. So, until next time, try not to die. Till then, Grim out.